FOSPA presentation by James Juhnke from Wichita now, formerly at Bethel College. James Juhnke grew up in this area, excuse me, in fact, grew up in this congregation. He attended Bethel College in North Newton and earned his master's and doctor's degree at Indiana University. He taught history at Bethel College from 1967 to 2002. He has written a number of books about Mennonite history and peace interpretations of U.S. history, including The Missing Piece, The Search for Nonviolent Alternatives in the United States History, along with Carolyn Hunter. We are delighted to have Mr. Juhnke this evening. He will be talking about Kansas Mennonites and the Bicentennial. After the presentation, you may save your questions and ask them, and I'm sure he'll be delighted to deal with those questions. So, James, congratulations and welcome.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be back home again, and thank you all for coming out. Ambivalent celebration, Kansas Mennonites and the Bicentennial. Newsweek magazine, for the July 4 issue in the bicentennial year of 1976, had a special insert that featured this photo. Newsweek, McPherson, Kansas May Day celebration. A magnificent Uncle Sam led the parade, followed by armed military personnel from the Fort Riley base. I attended the McPherson County All Schools Day May Parade from as early as I can remember, and some of you did too, I'm sure. The parade from above on Main Street, it was always led by veterans or by current military carrying guns and flags. For the bicentennial celebration in '76, a drama troupe from Fort Riley performed a Parade of Flags event at the McPherson Park. They displayed the flag of every state in the Union. In the newspaper, we could read that helicopters flew out from Fort Riley to make sure that everything was in place for the Parade of Flags. What were the pacifist Mennonites of those communities to make of the bicentennial, and in particular the celebration of the American military and the War for Independence 200 years earlier? The Anabaptist Mennonite religious heritage is at odds with a national story of freedom obtained through violence. How could Mennonites navigate the boundaries between appropriate love of country on the one hand and idolatrous worship of the nation that was born in warfare? As though to highlight this tension, the McPherson Sentinel printed a story from the Associated Press about a Mennonite young man who had just returned from Vietnam. James Clausen of Gossel, a Bethel College grad, returned with a message that America had been duped into believing that communist victory in Vietnam would result in a bloodbath of revenge. Clausen said the communist takeover was remarkably peaceful, as he experienced it. America in 1976 did not want to be reminded of the painful Vietnam War. One way to view the enthusiastic celebrations of the centennial is that it was planned and carried out in order to overcome the painful divisions of that war, to bring the country together again. Already in 1975, Kansas Mennonites helped create 3 official denominational statements about the bicentennial. These statements attempted to balance appreciation for American democracy with criticism of national failures. while strongly affirming that God alone, not any nation, was worthy of worship and veneration. Most widely distributed was a statement, Christians in the Bicentennial, adopted by the Peace section of the Mennonite Central Committee of MCC. That statement was a series of bullet points, which don't appear on the slide for some reason, under 6 different headings, followed by 10 discussion questions. But they included the reason to be grateful here for our experience in America, for periods of peace and prosperity, for democracy and toleration. But the next set identified the nation's failure to be fully what it should be, including the squandering of resources by American consumption, the threats and use of violence, the treatment of Indians and blacks, and giving power to the wealthy few. Additional points of testimony and confession called for commitment to put Christ's kingdom above every worldly loyalty, even though conflicts with the government will result. And it identified the church, not the nation, as God's primary agent in history. The Western District, in October of 1975, and I suppose most of us have attended some Western District conference meetings, the big issue in 1975, or one of the biggest issues, was a bicentennial resolution that was proposed. It was shorter than the Peace section statement, but it too suggested that the supreme lordship of Christ and his kingdom supersedes all national loyalties. And the resolution called members to refrain from participation in those activities that bring glory and honor to the military. We will refrain from offering speeches, prayers, or use of Christian symbols in such a way as these might be interpreted as support of the evils of nationalism. The Western District resolution did not have a section of appreciation for American democracy, and some of the delegates demanded that it should. Also was a question of whether the American flag had a legitimate place in church sanctuaries. That was a hot issue at the time in '76. Wesley Preeb, the Southern District of the Mennonite Brethren Conference, meeting in Enid, Oklahoma, authorized its Faith and Life Commission also to draft a bicentennial statement for the Mennonite Brethren. Wesley Preeb, the academic dean and professor of English at Tabor College, was the chairman of the commission and probably the author of the resulting statement that was adopted by the as the statement for the entire Mennonite Brethren Church. Their statement began with a historical preface that referred to the first century Christian church and its witness to the priority of Christ over against the claims of the Roman Empire. I think Wesley Preeb was subtly, without saying anything, was comparing the Roman Empire with the American Empire. One distinctive part of this was, of their statement, was they raised the issue of the end times, a kind of a different theme that didn't appear in any of the other statements. This statement asked whether Mennonite Brethren had placed our trust in national survival rather than in the return of our Lord. It's an interesting way of putting it. Difference between GCs and MBs. And they also asked, are we moving in the direction of a civil religion? The concept of civil religion proposed by Robert Bellah in his landmark essay of 1967, Civil Religion in America, provided Mennonite intellectuals with a tool to critique nation worship in the bicentennial. In January 1976, the Christian Leader, which is the MB denominational periodical published in Hillsborough, printed an article by Paul Taves, who was a graduate of Tabor College and a young professor at Fresno Pacific University, Mennonite Brethren School in California. It was a very hard-hitting article and took the Mennonite Brethren to task for having become victims of American civil religion. We migrated to America to practice a faith distinctive from national and civic trappings. Have we sold that birthright for civic conformity and national religion? Is the way Taves asked the question. Whoa. Donald Crable, a Mennonite sociologist from Pennsylvania, also offered a substantially negative view of civil religion in a popular book for the bicentennial, Our Star-Spangled Faith. By 2012, that book had been translated into 6 non-English languages and had sold nearly 100,000 copies. In 1976, however, some Kansas Mennonites found Crable too negative. Dwayne Friesen, professor of Bible and religion at Bethel College, wrote a critical review of Crable's book. To support his view of civil religion as totally evil, Friesen wrote, Crable described the worst aspects of civil religion as practiced and the ideal aspects of Christianity as it should be believed by true Christians. A more balanced and accurate view, said Friesen, would acknowledge that Christianity and civil religion have overlapping values that make it possible for Christians to work for justice in society. The differences between Friesen, a General Conference Mennonite, and Crable, who was from Pennsylvania and of Swiss South German background, corresponded to the typical social and theological characteristics of those Mennonite churches. John Esau, pastor of the Bethel College Mennonite Church, had written his master's thesis on civil religion and was an important, I won't take the time to tell about his work, but he spoke also at Eden Mennonite Church about civil religion during these, I think in '75. Esau suggested we not talk about civil religion at all, which was such an emotional term and such a negative term that we couldn't have decent conversation about it. Esau said we should talk about the national ethos instead of the civil religion. Part of the Mennonite challenge was to engage patriotic conservative evangelicalism. Robert Kreider, conservative evangelical Christians took advantage of the bicentennial to promote nationalistic views. Some Kansas Mennonite leaders, aware that ordinary Mennonites were often attracted to conservative evangelicalism, spoke out against the excesses of this literature. Robert Kreider, director of Mennonite Library and Archives and professor of peace studies at Bethel College, wrote a sharply critical review of one popular evangelical book that identified God and country, America, God Shed His Grace on Thee. God's grace and rifle and military symbols. Kreider noted that this author believed that God gave the Americans military victory in the war for independence. A beautifully illustrated and exquisitely printed book glorified militarism and the cult of American riches. Kreider wrote, I see this book as like unto a work of pornography, which should not be sold in church-related bookstores. Listen up, Faith and Life bookstore. I speak with feeling because I love America and I want to be faithful to Jesus Christ who loves America and Canada and Tanzania and the people of every land. Keith Springer, Kreider's colleague on the faculty at Bethel College, also wrote book reviews of these red, white, and blue bicentennial books, lamented, or he found the books that he reviewed not very remarkable nor likely to be very memorable. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, he said of these books. The Christian leader. While the influence of conservative evangelicalism was strongest among the Mennonite Brethren, the MB Conference had joined the National Association of Evangelicals when it was founded in 1944. Orlando Harms, editor of the MB Christian Leader, reported that he had been offended by the excessive patriotic militaristic displays at the NAE meetings. He protested to one of the NAE leaders and suggested that perhaps the MBs didn't even belong there. In 1976, editorials in the Christian Leader did not specifically critique conservative evangelical patriotism. In March, however, Associate Editor Wally Croker lamented the ill-advised and misinformed evangelical opposition to the Child and Family Services Act. So there was some critical view there. We'll move on to the next section, Engaging History, Race, and Native Americans. This is John Ruth. In the face of bicentennial celebrations of the American War for Independence, some Mennonites proposed alternative views of the War for Independence. Pennsylvania Mennonite historians undertook an extensive research to publish a large book of documents about the Mennonite experience in the war. John Ruth's book was titled "'Twas Seeding Time," a popular account of the Mennonite experience during the Revolution. The Mennonite Weekly Review, edited in Newton, Kansas, began serial publication of Ruth's book in May of 1976. In Ruth's view, the War for Independence was, quote, a tragic adventure in human impatience. It's not what you've heard in most of the bicentennial material. Oh my goodness. Here's one history teacher at Bethel College who took the occasion of the bicentennial to reinterpret the United States history from the viewpoint of Anabaptist Mennonite peace values. He suggested that the conflicts between England and her American colonies could have been managed without resort to warfare. The War for Independence wasn't even necessary, according to this radical young historian. This person's unsung hero of the Revolution was Joseph Galloway, the leader of the Quaker Party in Pennsylvania. At the First Continental Congress in the fall of 1774, Galloway proposed a radical reform of the British Empire, an American Parliament to share power with the British Parliament. Galloway's proposal failed to pass by the vote of a single colony. One vote on the other side, and Galloway's proposal to a radical reform of the British Empire would have been sent to the mother country. This is Thomas Paine, who was one of this young historian's goats. The loyalist Galloway was more wise, and his viewpoint was preferable to Thomas Paine, whose intemperate writing helped bring about the war. Vincent Harding, director of the Institute of the Black World in Atlanta, was an African-American historian and former Mennonite pastor. And he also has spoken often at Eden Mennonite Church. In 1976, Harding helped Mennonites see the bicentennial from the viewpoint of African Americans. In a speech at Bethel College, Harding said that the United States was largely a white success story. The signers of the Declaration of Independence did not include the masses of people in their document. Slaves and poor people struggled for dignity against enormous odds. If there is anything to celebrate, said Harding, Let it be that long, hard, costly struggle of the dispossessed. This will help us see how much is yet to be done. It will open our minds to the promise of a nation that sees beauty and joy in diversity. Lawrence Hart, a Cheyenne Indian, a graduate of Bethel College and pastor of the Native American Mennonite Church in Clinton, Oklahoma, represented the Indian viewpoint as Harding did for blacks. On March 20, 1976, Hart spoke at a study conference on Mennonites and the Bicentennial, sponsored at Bethel College by the Western District Conference Historical Committee. "What is there to celebrate?" asked Hart. His answer, "We have survived." Hart gave credit to Quakers and Mennonites for contributing to the survival of his people. One of his passions was to bring stories of the Cheyenne tradition of the peace chiefs, together with the stories of Anabaptist Mennonite pacifism, to show the transcendent common values in both traditions. I think we move on to the grassroots celebrations. While Mennonite church leaders and intellectuals drafted resolutions and organized symposia and wrote books and articles in response to the bicentennial, Mennonites in their local communities took part in bicentennial celebrations in a myriad of ways. In December of 1975, Waldo Waltner, owner of Central Kansas Hatchery in Mound Ridge and president of the Turkey Federation of Kansas, presented a bicentennial turkey to Kansas Governor Robert Bennett for the Christmas holidays in behalf of the Federation. North Newton and Bethel College were on the route of an 82-day, 4,250-mile bicentennial trail from Yorktown, Virginia to Reedsport, Oregon. At least 2 Mennonites, including one Bethel College student, made the entire tour. On September 2, the Retail Committee of the Heston Chamber of Commerce put a commercial spin on the events with a bicentennial, B-U-Y, bicentennial celebration, S-E-L-L-A-B-R-A-T-I-O-N. They blocked off Heston's Main Street for 4 hours to feature displays by downtown stores and a flea market, a downtown garage sale for others. Mennonite civic leaders in the small towns of Buhler, Mound Ridge, Inman, Gossel, and Heston joined with non-Mennonites in using the bicentennial theme for their annual community parades and celebrations. There were bicentennial queens, bicentennial tricycle races, bicentennial beard contests, bicentennial golf competitions, bicentennial quilts, bicentennial middle school essays, and so on. These were covered in the newspapers. Ben Bays led the way for Gossel, received a matching bicentennial gift of $5,000 to develop the Mennonite Heritage Complex. They got $5,000 from the Kansas Bicentennial Commission to build a museum and the Heritage Complex in Gossel. The most highly publicized Mennonite bicentennial artifact was a wheat bell created in Gossel. Ben Bays was a retired high school teacher, I believe in Mound Ridge, right? And founding president of the Mennonite Immigrant Foundation at Gossel. He made arrangements to create a wheat straw replica of the Liberty Bell for display at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of local folks, including women who put in over 1,000 man-hours, participated in making a 6-foot-tall wire frame, preparing the wheat straw and weaving it into the final product. Marie and Martha Voth, twin sisters who were nurses at Bethel Deaconess Hospital in Newton, created the bell banner with actual with letters of actual wheat berries mounted on a background of cracked wheat, accented with black thread. Here is Ori Rickert, director then of the Gospel Mennonite Heritage Complex. You can see the bell today in the Gospel Museum. Some of you probably have. Have any of you seen it at the? A few. Well, you need to go to Gospel to the wheat center there, and it was almost a year at the Smithsonian, and Ben Bays went to the dedication ceremony at the Smithsonian and was pleased that dignitaries picked out this item to give special recognition. Mennonites again had made the big time in bicentennial celebration. Washington, D.C. in 1976 attracted Kansas Mennonites in other ways as well. The Smithsonian Folklife Festival invited Meta Juhnke of the Eden Mennonite Church, Swiss Volinian, and Esther Schmidt of the Alexanderville Church, who is Dutch-Russian, to display their traditional cheese and cookie-making skills on the National Mall. Also performing on the National Mall was a four-member Mennonite Schweitzer ensemble of banjos and mandolins from the Eden Mennonite Church. Is that right? Or were they also from other churches? Was this Eden? Maybe some of you can tell us later in the discussion time. On July 12, the combined choirs of Tabor College and Bethel College sang in the Bicentennial Parade of Music at the John F. Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. Tabor and Bethel were at each other's throats in football and basketball, but the choirs could combine and do a bicentennial concert in the John F. Kennedy Center. One of the great singing groups among Mennonites at this time was the Dalkey Family Chorus, directed by Jake Dalkey. At the time of the Gospel Wheat Festival, the organizers invited the Dalkey Chorus to make a presentation, to present a program, and substantially patriotic music. A few family members refused to sing. They just stood up there with their mouths closed on the Battle Hymn of the Republic while everybody else was singing, which suggests part of the ambivalence here, the fact that Mennonites didn't necessarily agree on how to celebrate. A bicentennial program. Leanne Taves of the Tabor Mennonite Church was distressed that the Gospel Threshing Days program included the Dalkey family singers because they so mixed up patriotic and religious music in ways that Leanne found offensive. In response, she wrote a historical play which she called Mennonite Kaleidoscope that depicted authentic Mennonite life and faith. It was performed at the Alexanderville Mennonite Church at the very same time the Dalkey singers were doing their program. So you could make your choice. Actually, I think they both were on twice, so you could go back. You could take in both of them. This is local actors performing for the play in the Alexanderville Mennonite Church. Whoa. Meanwhile, William Juhnke of the Eden Mennonite Church, sponsored by the Swiss Mennonite Cultural and Historical Association, wrote and produced a play in Mound Ridge that brought together Anabaptist Mennonite symbols and American national icons. A prologue about Anabaptist suffering and steadfastness in Switzerland was followed by an opening act featuring the voices and views of Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, and Abraham Lincoln. One reviewer wrote, "The antiphonal reading at the end pointed away from narrow nationalism toward a universal loyalty to mankind everywhere." Some Mennonites who could be very critical of their country also took opportunities to describe their love for America. Robert Kreider, in a poetic essay entitled "A Hymn of Affection for a Land and a People," listed the specific things he liked about his country: the names of people and places, writers to celebrate the American experience, national parks and monuments, small towns, trees, wild animals, heroic figures. But he named a number of heroic figures, but didn't include any military heroes on the list. Ethnic diversity, food, technology, clothing, household arts, music, sports, newspapers, comic strips, humor, and museum artifacts and artists. Oh, maybe here is Kreider shaking hands with Jimmy Carter, and in the background is one of the greatest American military heroes, Teddy Roosevelt. So, Robert Schrag, editor of Mennonite Weekly Review, approached the bicentennial with an upbeat, positive view. This would be an appropriate time to review the whole panorama of the American experience and give thanks for the many positive and beneficent elements in it. He was not worried that the bicentennial would affect the Mennonite attitude toward the state. He began and ended his editorial with affirmations about the American experience, but along the way, he included an admonition for separation from the bicentennial that would not appear in most Protestant denominational newspapers. He said, "Our non-resistant belief certainly excludes us from participating in observances that glorify the martial aspects of the nation." So can we go when Fort Riley soldiers are there with their guns and Uncle Sam leading the parade? Can we participate in that? He didn't say specifically here, but he said, "Neither should we give our blessing to religious organizations or gatherings that link God's purposes with those of the country in a kind of civil religion." In November of 1976, the Kansas Mennonite Men's Chorus went on a bicentennial tour to eastern Colorado and western Kansas. The tour culminated with a concert on Thanksgiving Day weekend in Century 2 Concert Hall in Wichita. The Kansas Mennonite Men's Chorus Choir, in its 8th season in 1976, had more than 400 male singers, mostly musically untrained Mennonite farmers, mechanics, teachers, and preachers who had learned to sing four-part harmony in church and were able to make remarkably good music. Paul Volgemuth was the director at that time of the men's chorus. He composed a special version of the anthem, America the Beautiful, for the concert, or for the occasion of the trip, including the concert in Wichita. On November 27, 1976, an overflow crowd of 2,400 people packed the concert hall at Century 2, and hundreds of latecomers were turned away. One person told me that thousands of people were turned away. The choir sang 14 numbers, one in German, Gott ist die Liebe, America the Beautiful, But America the Beautiful was the only non-religious song in the concert and was in the final section, and it was followed by Stand Up for Jesus, and finally by G.F. Handel's Hallelujah Chorus. On the back page of the program, a bicentennial celebration in song, were notes written by C. Nevin Miller, teacher from Heston. Miller pointedly gave credit to God, not to the country, for blessings that Mennonites had enjoyed. The town of Hillsborough, population of about 3,000, outdid all other towns in south central Kansas in bicentennial celebration. Governor John Carlin designated Hillsborough an official bicentennial town. Hillsborough's civic leaders managed to attract 2 nationally sponsored exhibitions, an official bicentennial wagon train in March and the Armed Forces Bicentennial Caravan in October. The bicentennial wagon train was one of several in the country that traversed historic national trails and converged at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania on July 4. The Hillsborough Star-Journal estimated that 5,000 people attended the Main Street Parade, and some 4,000 stayed for the evening program in Memorial Park. The wagon train had national corporate sponsorships, but the Armed Forces Bicentennial Caravan was a public relations product for the U.S. Department of Defense. In addition, the local Hillsborough Bicentennial Commission, co-chaired by Carol Wiebe and Ray Baker, organized its own Memorial Day bicentennial birthday celebration on May 29. The parade included a 13-man military color guard from Fort Riley, American Legion members, and the Boy Scouts. Garner Shriver, 4th District Congressman, spoke at the dedication of a new civic center. Golfers participated in a bicentennial golf tournament and many other bicentennial events. Why celebrate the bicentennial? The Mennonites of Hillsborough had mixed reactions to the bicentennial celebrations. One enthusiastic supporter was Elmer Fleming, president of the First National Bank and leading member of the Parkview Mennonite Brethren Church. Annoyed by articles in MB denominational periodicals, The Christian Leader, that were critical of American civil religion, Fleming wrote an essay titled, "Why Celebrate the Bicentennial?" He said, "The Declaration of Independence is the official and unequivocal recognition by the American people of their belief and faith in God. It is a religious document," that is the Declaration of Independence, "it is a religious document from the first sentence to the last. It affirms God's existence as self-evident truth, which requires no further discussion or debate. The nation it creates is God's country." On the opposite side from Fleming were some teachers and students at Tabor College, which is located a few blocks south and east of the center of town. Tabor was wrestling with its identity as a Mennonite Christian liberal arts college. One new faculty member who arrived at Tabor in January 1976 found Tabor to be a hornet's nest of controversy. This is John Taves and Jack Dewick. At the center of debate were a number of young idealistic faculty members who urged Tabor to become a distinctively Anabaptist Christian school with a strong peace emphasis. On the other side were teachers and administrators who promoted a conservative evangelical identity that would attract more students of non-Mennonite background. Students in a college forum presentation identified the parties as the pacifists versus the patriots, the alleged Mennonite ethnicists versus Protestantism. One label for the idealists, like Taves and Dewick, was radical neo-Anabaptists. In October 1976, the Neo-Anabaptist group at Tabor mobilized a public protest when the most militaristic of Hillsborough's bicentennial events, the Armed Forces Bicentennial Caravan, came to town. The caravan consisted of 4 large semi-truck trailers carrying museum displays for the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, quote, recounting the contributions made to America by her armed forces. The Tabor College Neo-Anabaptists decided to set up a counter-military display, deliberately crude and low-tech, in contrast to the sophisticated and expensive military caravan museums. For a display table for peace literature, they rolled in a large wooden utility wire frame and tipped it on its side. They parked their bicycles in front of the gas-guzzling military semi-trailers and put up a sign, "Christians are concerned. Has war ever made peace?" Visitors to the peace display engaged the protesters in friendly as well as hostile conversation. K.B. Bruce, the editor of the Hillsborough Star-Journal, said in his editorial, "The history portrayed in this fine caravan gave those few protesting individuals Saturday their right to distribute material for peace in this country." Roy Just was the president of Tabor College, and he was caught in the middle of a highly polarized situation. One thing I don't have a slide on is from the homecoming. At homecoming, like at Bethel College, the various dormitories or student clubs would make floats, and they decided in the fall, actually it was the fall of 1975, to make American history and especially patriotic history the center of this, and that was supposed to be the theme of the parade. The Student Christian Organization at Tabor College considered this offensively non-Mennonite and non-Anabaptist and even non-Christian. And they made a big issue of it and boycotted. They refused to make a float. And the editor of the student newspaper, whose name I'm not remembering, wrote a harsh editorial blasting the Student Christian Organization leaders. Well, their advisor was John Taves, the Neo-Anabaptist, and I suppose the faculty member had something to do with this. Mennonites in south central Kansas both resisted and welcomed the national bicentennial celebrations of '76. Their expressions of resistance, I might say our expressions of resistance and of welcome, varied among local congregations and communities. Official statements drafted by denominational leaders, as we have seen, warned against idolatrous worship of the nation while expressing appreciation for American freedom. Mennonite folk at the local level embraced opportunities to participate in ways that showed their love of country. All Mennonite responses to the bicentennial demonstrated the extent of their Americanization. The protesters protested in American ways, and the celebrators celebrated in American ways. This is Robert Schrag. He wrote an editorial trying to summarize things up. People willing to dissent, to take a stand different from prevailing opinion in order to remain true to their convictions, have an indispensable role in preserving true freedom of conscience. Mennonite resistance to the bicentennial's narrative of American history, freedom obtained through warfare, justified the claim to Mennonite responsible citizenship. So Robert Schrag was making a claim for American diversity and the way Mennonites have contributed to that diversity. So we end with Uncle Sam and your questions or comments. Do any of you know this Uncle Sam? Anybody from McPherson would remember who was playing Uncle Sam in this parade? I don't know.
I'll bring a mic to anyone that has questions for Jim.
I'd be interested also in any memories you have from 1976, or is this all a distant fog? It's the business of historians to reach into the fog and try to lift out the stories and
Identify yourself.
My name's Herb Zook from Heston, a good friend of Lloyd Gehring, who is beside me over here. So I get to say some good stuff just because Lloyd's here, I think, or I'm with Lloyd. One of the things that Mennonites talk about is that we are in the world but not of the world, which led me to write an article for our church newsletter in Hays, Kansas, claiming that the church is not nationalistic, but it should be internationalistic. And I'd like to encourage the use of that term about the church. We are internationalistic. So you can't zero in on one country and say it belongs in that country, and all of the loyalties are tied to that country. I still like the term internationalistic.
yeah, Robert Kreider in particular was making that point. There were others. In the world and not of the world. In the world is expressed in the Mennonite bicentennial statements of their love for America and their appreciation for American democracy and the toleration of worship and so on. But not of the world, not being of the world, is represented by the Mennonite critique of militarism, critiqued in various ways in 76.
I'm Carol Temple. I'm curious what some of the responses to your book, The Missing Piece, were and are.
Yeah, I was beginning in 76. I was already working on the themes of the book, The Missing Piece, which attempted to reinterpret all of American history from the lens of conflict resolution, peace, nonviolence, which I claimed had at least something to do with the Mennonite and Anabaptist heritage. That book came out just a few months before the 9/11 disaster, and one could do an essay at least, if not a something like I've done this evening, just on the Mennonite response to 9/11. But part of that response, among Mennonites in particular, the book bolstered their sentiments, their peace sentiments, and their ability to make a case of an alternative narrative to the militaristic responses that were called for. And so that book got its most positive response in the Mennonite community. It got also some negative responses. I spoke at Hutchinson Junior College about the book, and the editor of the junior college paper was present, and he took severe exception to my criticism of Abraham Lincoln and his role. The book argues that Abraham Lincoln could have done some things differently that would have made the Civil War less likely, perhaps could have avoided the Civil War. Most people are not used to having Abraham Lincoln being critiqued, but Abraham Lincoln, in my view, was one of the strongest nationalists in American history. Would that he might have been a greater internationalist. The editor of the Hutchinson Junior College paper, our community college paper, wrote a very strong editorial against what I was saying and lamented the waste of a perfectly good PhD degree. The book was most warmly received by evangelical Christian historians. I belong to an association of evangelical Christian historians, and they welcomed this, which was very interesting to me. That book for me was an outgrowth. Keith Sprunger, my colleague at Bethel College, said, Jim has been planning on writing this book from the time that he started teaching in college. My response was, I'd been planning to write this book, or been prepared to write this book from the time I was 4 years old or 3 years old, my earliest memories of my parents and of the Eden Mennonite Church and so on. I'm sure that this congregation is where I learned this, the remarkable witness of Eden Mennonite Church during World War II. The high numbers of this congregation that went into civilian public service. My father, William Juhnke, in the debate in this congregation on how should we respond to people who did not go into, or who did, in opposition to the church's official position, go into military service. What should we do? Should they be full members? My father argued in the congregational meeting that those people should be given a chance to repent, confess their sin to the congregation. If they fail to do so, they should be removed from membership. So I grew up in a pretty strong Mennonite pacifist family. I don't remember the event, but I found his speech in his notes. Dad was my teacher in the 4th grade at Pleasant Ridge Grade School. And he had us write letters to our congressman about important issues. And I wrote my first letter to a congressman his name was Sheppel. I don't know if any of you remember Congressman Sheppel. But I wrote warning against military alliances in the post-World War II era. We were creating a North Atlantic Treaty Organization which would militarize Europe. And so I wrote, I had no idea what I was writing. Dad told me what to write. But this was practice at Pleasant Ridge Grade School, a one-room grade school. This was practice in responsible citizenship. That is, Mennonite values should be applied to the political and social and cultural world in which we live. So I was very fortunate to be able to teach for 30-plus years at Bethel College and try to work some of these things out. Any more comments?
Russ Stuckey. Yeah, this is more of a comment than anything, but given what tends to be our Mennonite view of the world and our place in it, and being citizens of God's kingdom in the world, it's still, I don't get involved in church politics a lot, but it really baffles me that a dozen years ago our leaders couldn't come up with a better name than Mennonite Church USA. I just have never been able to wrap my brain around that one.
It'd be okay with you if USA didn't appear in the name. Exactly. Yeah. We were trying to differentiate ourselves from Canada. Of course, the General Conference for many years had been binational, and now we were separating. Canada was going its way, and we were joining the Old Mennonites and changing the boundaries of our denominational organization. And so I think we were thinking USA.
I understand some of that, but I think it was a reaction. You got distracted by something and failed to look at, or the leaders failed to look at the big picture, got distracted by the Canadian issue. And
Our names may be shifting. You probably have heard that our seminary has changed its name from Mennonite Biblical Seminary to Anabaptist. How is it? Anabaptist Biblical Seminary? The name Mennonite is still there?
Yeah.
Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical. It's still AMBS, but not it was Associated Mennonite Biblical Seminary. So it's still AMBS. It may be over the next 25 or 50 years, and when we think about the importance of names, that Anabaptist will gradually replace Mennonite?
To what do you attribute, or else maybe you don't, but I sort of feel as if the Mennonite or the Anabaptist position as a pacifist Christianity has been sort of pushed to the side or considered irrelevant or even almost not necessary in large parts of current Mennonitism. Is that a correct assumption, or is this something that we should really be concerned about?
I'd be interested in what kind of responses you and the audience might have to that question. Has the tide of acculturation been more in the direction of nationalism and attempting to diminish or forget about our Mennonite roots? Maybe this isn't fair, but I would say the evidence is at Tabor College and among Mennonite brethren is very, very clear that tendency is happening. And there was a turning point in the late 1970s and early 1980s when a strong core of 5 or 6 neo-Anabaptists all gave up trying to turn Tabor College into an Anabaptist school and left, resigned. One of them was Calvin Redekop, who you may know, John Taves, Ben Ullenberger, who went to the seminary to teach, and Jack Dewick, and so on. I don't know that Bethel College's record is, I know that it's not clear on this. These things are difficult to judge. I do want to say that those of us, if we think back, those of us who were protesting the Vietnam War, as I think back about my own involvement in those protests, we were doing things in a very American way. And we were following models of the American peace movement. It wasn't simply that we were being true to Anabaptist Mennonite values. We had been Americanized and had plugged into one strand of American life that was different from other strands that took different positions. So it's not like acculturated Mennonites against faithful Anabaptist non-acculturated Mennonites.
Most people probably know that you ran for Congress here in Kansas. What do you see the role of Mennonites in politics today? Active, passive? Would you do it again?
Yes, I'd do it again. I'd do it again if I weren't 74 years old. And I'm jealous I look with pride to those Mennonites who have been and are active in politics. And I'm a member now at Lorraine Avenue Mennonite Church for 12 years. Judy Loganbill, member of our congregation, has been serving in the Kansas legislature. And she is, often it is said that Mennonites in politics are not integrated and involved in the church. That's not true for her. She's very active in the local church, and in the sharing period on Sunday mornings, she would tell about the legislature. Now, unfortunately, redistricting put her in a different district where she had to run in the primary against another very strong Democrat, and she lost in the Democrat primary, so will no longer be representing us. But there is a long history of Mennonites in the Kansas legislature and in other positions. Dwayne Gosen was in the legislature, and he's a committed, very committed peace person. The same can be said of Jesse Harder from Buhler. Do any of you know Jesse Harder from Buhler? He was in the legislature for a number of years, a Democrat MB who had been in civilian public service and had a strong peace witness in the legislature, was a strong advocate of ending the death penalty, ending capital punishment. That issue is still with us. We need peace people to finally get Kansas on board with the national and international trend to end the death penalty. So, yes, I favor that, but I also resonate with the arguments made that we quoted from the bicentennial, that God's agent for carrying out God's will in the world is not primarily the nation, but it is the church. Now that's an article of faith. I don't know if social and political scientists would back that up in any way, but that's the way it ought to be. I have more faith that the church's positions on prominent public issues are more responsive to God's will than what either Romney or Obama are saying. Well, we've been at this for an hour. If
Someone have a last question?
I want to introduce Andre. I brought along a special guest, Andre Gingrich Stoner, or is it Stoner Gingrich? I didn't prepare to properly introduce him, but he's in the area for denominational Mennonite meetings. He's a very strong peace advocate.
And I'll just comment that Andre is going to be back here in March for our Peace Sunday. He'll be our speaker for Peace Sunday. So glad to have him here tonight, and we're looking forward to having him here next March. And everybody that's here tonight is welcome to come.
And if you have things that you want him to say, now's your chance to get your oar into that water. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.